I'm not sure where they got the photograph from. It's about 10 years old. I looked 10 years younger. So welcome and thank you, TVS. TVS has been supporting the Wounds Research Network for the last 4 years. And what that's meant really is that we've been able to interact much more closely with other disciplines involved in wounds research. And what I'm going to do today is provide you with an overview, a brief overview of some of the work that's been going on in the UK over the last 2 decades. So the UK is really it's leading in surgical site infection and wound pressure ulcer prevention and wound healing research. And the reason for that is that we've got the NIHR, which is a public funder of large-scale research. It's sort of outstanding levels of research funding in the country that we can access. We've got clinical research nurse networks which have a research nurse infrastructure which support accrual of patients into large studies. And we've got clinical trials units and methodologists who support clinicians in designing a robust, large-scale epidemiological and also clinical trials activity. And I'm fortunate to work in one of the largest clinical trials units in the UK, and I've been involved in the development of wounds research in that trials unit, but also other clinical specialties. So it's kind of useful as a nurse to be positioned within with a group of statisticians and methodologists. And then we also have very strong partnerships supporting NHS England, NHS improvement initiatives, and the same in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So that the very, very strong clinical academic collaborations. We know from the Cochrane reviews that we hear presented that the level of evidence in wound care is poor, that the studies, the large studies, are actually too small and they lack power. They also lack methodological rigour, and outcome measures are not standardised. And the other challenge that we have in wound care is that there are multiple specialties. So you all know, there's foot ulcers, leg ulcers, surgical wounds, vascular surgical wounds, trauma wounds, so various specialties, and the way that we work within the multidisciplinary teams varies from trust to trust, and also we tend not to interact with particularly surgeons in terms of research portfolios, and that's something that we are promoting, and things are developing quite rapidly in that regard. So you'll be aware of some of the portfolios of work that have been developed over a period of time. So the leg ulcer trials that were led by Nikki Cullum and colleagues, Venus 1, 2, 3 and 4. Last year we had the EVRA trial presented, the results of the EVRA trial presented, and that was a collaboration between vascular surgeons and community nurses in recruiting large numbers of patients and delivering a trial within the UK research and NHS economy. We've also had presentations at TVS about the Wolf trial and the WIS trial. So Wolf was negative. Both of these are negative wound pressure trials. One was in open fractures of the lower limb, and the other is in closed fractures of the other limb. And again, this is informing clinical practice. I think WIST is yet to report. Wolf was presented last year. I'm sure many of you will have heard me talk about some of the pressure ulcer work. So we've had programme grants, we've had trials, and we've really started to shape pressure ulcer prevention across the world because of the UK funding and people in the room here who've been involved in delivering that research. Similarly, so what I'm trying to get across is that these studies are not just one-off studies, that what we're seeing is a portfolio of development of studies in a number of topic areas. So in diabetic foot ulcer infection, for another example, is a systematic review commissioned by the HTA, Codify, which was a diagnostic agreement study on swab versus tissue sample, and we're now doing Codify 2, which is a diagnostic trial, a randomised controlled trial of swab versus tissue sample. So what I wanted to do was just to briefly talk about the active research portfolio. So we've talked about some of the stuff that's has been completed, but just to flag up some studies that you could all get involved in within your NHS centres. There are different topic areas and there are different challenges. Lynn Wilson and I will be doing a presentation at 11 o'clock on how to become a PI, a principal investigator. So that's somebody that works locally in each trust and takes the lead responsibility for research. So we've got 2 open trials in diabetic foot ulcer healing. Codify 2 I've mentioned, so that's about tissue versus swab as a sampling strategy for infection diagnosis. And we also have midfoot, which is a combination of various interventions, the standard care, debridement using Versajet, dermal skin substitute, so a skin graft, and negative wound pressure therapy. So these 2 trials are open. We desperately need patients and we need more centres. The surgeons are also running a number of 4 trials at the moment. There's 2 that are open and 2 that are in very early setup. Sorry, 3 that are in early setup. So one is PPAC2, which is packing of perianal abscess cavities after surgery versus just a simple dressing. So do we need to pack, or can we just leave the wound to heal on its own with a simple dressing on the outside? They have recruited 227 of 526 participants, and they're still looking for centres and they're still looking for collaborators. And if the PPAC2 is open in your centre, it's also possible to get involved as what is being called an associate PI role. So something that you can work with the local PI and support delivery of the trial. A study that's just being set up, so you'll notice that PPAC2 has got a 2 on the end, and Swishy 2 has also got a 2 on the end. So again, these are studies that are part of a portfolio. There's been development work, early phase work, and then it's led into a large-scale phase 3 trial. So Swishy 2 is negative wound pressure therapy, again, versus standard care for surgical wounds healing by secondary intention. It's led by, they want to recruit 700 patients. It's led by Ian Chetter at Hull, but they are looking for centres across the country, and they are just opening. So it was run successfully previously as a pilot. Sunrise is a study that's being led by surgical trainees. Again, negative wound pressure therapy to reduce surgical site infection after emergency laparotomy. So this is a surgical registrar-led or surgical trainee-led study. They have finished their pilot phase, and they are wanting to open additional centres, and they are very, very keen for nurses to be involved in this study in the both the recruitment and follow-up of patients, identification. And then Rossini 2, so another 2. There was Rossini 1, there's now Rossini 2. So this is the use of 3 different in-theatre interventions. So it has got a very theatre-centric focus. So they're comparing a skin wash prep, chlorhexidine 2%, an iodine impregnated film for the pre-incision that goes over the skin, and a gentamicin sponge prior to closure, insertion of the sponge. And they're combining these 3 interventions into 8 different possible combinations. And they're just set up. They've opened their first centre. They've got 12 patients. And they're very keen for other disciplines to get involved. It's a 24/7 recruitment process, and identifying the patients at the right time in the right place to get them into the studies and then follow them up. So that's my last slide, Linda. So contact details, and if you're interested, follow up with me or Lynn. Maybe can you stand up, Lynn? You don't know Lynn. After the presentation. So thank you. And I'd just like to say, so the session is, it's great to see so many of you in the room. So this session has been developed by the Wounds Research Network to be hosted by Tissue Viability Society, and it really wanted to showcase some of this fantastic and excellent clinical research that's being led by the UK, but impacting on worldwide practice. So thank you.
We just have a small logistical problem. Is there anybody for the regional study day in here? No? Not the regional study day? Because we've only got 4 people in there and we should have about 100. So there's nobody for the regional study day in here by accident? No. Thank you, that's fine. Thank you, Jane, that was very great. Is there anybody that's actually participating in one, anybody from an area that's actually participating in one of these studies that you know of? Right, does anybody think that they'd like their area to participate in such a study? There's potential. Yes, it's so exciting, isn't it? All these wonderful studies and excellent research that's being done. I was just wondering if the Wounds Research Education Network, is there any other such networks in the world similar to that, or is this quite an innovative network of researchers?
Well, I mean, there are associations. So there's obviously UMA and the World Union, and the European Tissue Repair Society. But I think that what the UK has, which is different really, is this kind of critical mass of clinicians and methodologists and trials units who were actively involved in wounds research and doing methodological work. So that, for example, yesterday we were talking about use of photography in trials, but that is likely then to have an impact on clinical practice if we can develop a system that's robust for infection diagnosis, for example, using telemedicine methods. So I think it is unique, but it is very niche. There is some interest from certainly European colleagues in the pressure ulcer prevention world, because they sort of recognise that the sort of discussions that we're having in REN are of value to them. And then there are similar things like Cochrane collaboration is obviously a worldwide network of people that are particularly focused on systematic reviews, but we're not. I wouldn't like to say we were completely unique, but the UK definitely has a particular group of specialists. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. I know as a clinician, if I come across scientists or doctors that are doing research, I point them in the direction of the REN education network. So it is a great resource to have. Right, thank you.